I'm Seth Hatena, a veteran journalist covering military and national security affairs, and this is the After Action Report. My guest today is Rob Harrison. Rob spent nearly 26 years in the United States Air Force. He started his Air Force career as an airborne cryptologic linguist, and he's deployed in support of numerous operations. As a career enlisted aviator, Rob was qualified on 23 different ISR, that's intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, and special operations airframes, with over 3,500 flying hours, and much of that was in combat and combat support. Before retiring in 2021 at the rank of Chief Master Sergeant, Rob was deeply involved in cyber operations, serving as the senior enlisted advisor to the Director of Joint Force Headquarters Cyber. Rob, thank you so much for your service, and thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure, Seth. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it very much.
All right. Hey, Rob, so the reason you and I are talking is because you reached out to me after my first podcast with Eric Deming about the controversy at the new National Medal of Honor Museum that's opening next month in Arlington, Texas. And for anyone in the audience who hasn't watched or listened to that podcast, I recommend you go back and check it out because it'll give you some context for today's discussion from a different point of view. But I want to put to you the same question I asked Eric, that a lot of people are upset that the museum won't be honoring Medal of Honor winner John Chapman, an Air Force combat controller who was killed in Afghanistan in a mission we're going to be talking about today. Chapman was killed along with 6 other men in 2002, but the museum won't be honoring him, but it will be honoring Britt Slabinski, a SEAL, former SEAL who was on the same mission with Chapman and survived and was also awarded the Medal of Honor. So, Rob, I wanted to get your take on the controversy at the museum.
To say the least, Seth, I was blown away when I first... I think what got my attention was an article through Outkick. There were several news postings that I had seen, and then I saw a post from a good friend of mine, Lori Chapman Longfritz, that really threw me for a loop. And unfortunately, it kind of opened some old wounds when you look back to the Medal of Honor upgrade process that the Air Force went through for John Chapman. And ultimately, it just seems like every day that moves forward, there's just another slap in the face.
Okay, let's get into this. I'm really grateful you're here because you played a pretty unique role in the events leading to John Chapman's upgrade to a Medal of Honor. First, you were an eyewitness to Chapman's extraordinary heroism on that day in 2002 on the mountain in Afghanistan. And then years later, you were involved in preparing the Air Force's submission package for Chapman's medal, which gave you a front row seat on how the SEALs reacted to that effort and how they interfered with the effort to honor Chapman with the nation's highest military award for valor. So let's start with the first part of that. On March 4th, 2002, that's the date of the battle that claimed John Chapman's life. You were a crew member of Grim 32, which is an AC-130 gunship, and you heard John Chapman's voice come over the radio. Do you remember what that message was?
Yeah, absolutely. We were tasked to be the emergency on-call CAS platform, that's close air support. That evening, we didn't have a dedicated mission. Our sole purpose in the airspace was to be there and be on call for any emergency that might pop up. We flew directly from Uzbekistan down to Pakistan, right through various airspace over the Afghanistan AOR, went straight to a tanker, and then we were topping off for fuel so that we had maximum playtime. We had the longest amount of loiter time that we could while we were there. While we were on tanker, we were fueling up, and there was a mayday call that came over the fires net, and it was, "Mayday, mayday, mayday, any Grim, any nail, this is Mako 30 Charlie."
What does that message mean for the non-military folks in the audience?
So mayday is obviously like an internationally recognized distress call. And when when the element that was calling up, Mako 30 Charlie, called, they were calling any Grim or any Nail, and those happened to be the call signs that the AC-130s were flying under at that point. The Spectres were Grim, and the spooky gunships were Nail.
And what had happened to John and his team?
At that point, we didn't know in real time, but at that point, their helicopter had just crashed. They were on Razor 03 and Mako 30 Charlie. The Charlie suffix was the designator for John Chapman as the combat controller on that assault force.
You fly to the site of the crash, and did you get a clearer picture of what had happened?
Yeah, once we arrived, Mako 30 Charlie, John Chapman, ended up relaying to us that they had lost a teammate from their helicopter when they originally tried to infiltrate the top of Takur Ghar. If you back up a moment, Mako 30 was trying to infill on top of Takur Ghar via Razor 03 and MH-47. Originally, they were supposed to be covered by an AC-130 with the call sign of Nail. Nail was the aircraft that got retasked to the airfield under attack. Then the helos fixed their maintenance issue, and they flew in based on the original LZ being clear, the landing zone being called clear. It was called clear because in the standoff orbit that Nail was in, from that distance, they couldn't quite get, they didn't have the fidelity to see any activity up there. They called what they saw, and that was nothing from that distance. And so the helicopters flew into the top of Takur Ghar thinking that there was no activity up there. Lo and behold, upon infill, the aircraft was lit up with small arms and RPGs.
Right. And Neil Roberts falls out of the helicopter, right?
Yeah, it turns out that Petty Officer Roberts had fallen out of the helicopter after that helicopter had taken fire. I'm sure that it jostled it a bit, and then based on the damage, I would imagine the situation was very tough for that pilot to maintain control of flight, and so they ended up limping off and crashing just north of the infill site.
Okay, so what did you do next?
So Chapman's relaying that Roberts had fallen out. He asked us to immediately establish an orbit to shift to that location. So we slid the sensors over to that area and just slid the orbit overhead the original infill site. As we were putting eyes on, you could see a person, a hotspot on the infrared sensor there on the mountaintop, and that person had an IR strobe on them. As you got a picture of the area, you could see some footpaths. Just look like dark lines based on the heat signature of the Earth. We were in what you would have called a black hot scenario on the IR sensor. But as you were looking down, you saw Petty Officer Roberts, what turned out to be Petty Officer Roberts with his strobe. But then out of nowhere, the enemy just came up on his position and surrounded him. It was like a bunch of ants crawling out of their nests.
Every member of that team is wearing a strobe to identify them and signal with their position, right?
Yeah, so there's a number of ways that we would use to identify friendlies on the ground. It's a number one issue when you've got a gunship or a close air support platform. Identify friendly locations so that you can deconflict your fire efforts towards the enemy and away from your friendlies. The strobe serves as one of those types of marking devices. There's several different ways to do it, but in this case, it was an IR strobe. He had a strobe on his body. It was emanating. It was flashing while he was there. When we got eyes on him, he was laying still. We didn't see any activity other than the strobe itself flashing until the enemy just surrounded his position. Like I said, at first it was just a couple of people, and then it was a whole lot of people that came out. We didn't know what the fate of Roberts was at this point. We couldn't tell. We could just see that there was a lot of people that had come up on that position.
Right. Let's back up a little bit. What was your job that day?
Yeah, so on board the AC-130, I'm there as a defensive sensor operator. I provide threat warning. I'm sitting in the booth on the gun deck, and in the booth, I've got both of the sensor operators, and I can see their respective screens and what's going on. So I do my job and then maintain situational awareness on what's going on board the aircraft and our various radios and outside the aircraft as well.
Got it. And so you can get a pretty good picture of what's happening down there.
Yeah, between the two sensors, you get both heat and light. Back then, you don't have the ability to fuse the two images together, but you can see where both of them are looking in their geographical, space of reference, until this sensor is looking at this particular point, and that sensor is looking at that point, and then they can merge the two, and so on and so forth.
Okay. So you're in orbit around the summit of Takur Ghar, while John Chapman and Mako 30 are preparing to return to come back and try and rescue Neil Roberts. And you're waiting for them to arrive. The AC-130 is one of the most fearsome aircraft in the sky with awesome firepower. Did you have an opportunity? Did you open fire on the enemy forces that were on the summit there?
At the point where Mako 30 is trying to infill to recover Petty Officer Roberts, no, not yet. There were two issues. One, we didn't know the status of Roberts, and we had a potential survivor, and so we were in recovery mode, thinking that this was going to be a rescue mission. So the last thing you want to do is start slinging rounds down right next to a friendly that's there on the ground. So the second part is night one of Anaconda ended up being a bit of a mess. There was a fratricide event that on the night before this, and it actually changed the rules of engagement. So we weren't able to do that distance control of close air support. We needed positive two-way comms with a ground party that was on the ground to direct our fires.
Got it. So you needed confirmation from the ground before you could open fire.
Yes, unfortunately.
Okay, so Mako 30 eventually does return to the summit, and you're still in orbit. You're watching what happens. What happens when they get there?
And so as they were on their way in, we were trying to coordinate the method that they would infill. We were trying to identify a safe location for the helicopter to insert the team. We had identified a spot that was a couple hundred meters away from the original insertion point, but obviously the team had a different approach in mind, and I think it had to do with the urgency of the situation. The spot that we had identified for them, we were marking the position so that the helicopter pilots could see it. It was a couple hundred meters away again, but that would have put them further down the slope. So if the team had inserted there, they would have had to fight uphill to get to Petty Officer Roberts. So they flew right through our mark and went right back to the original landing zone and infilled directly on that spot.
And what happened next?
At that point, the team exits the helicopter. The first guy out falls over. We think he had immediately been hit by gunfire. It turns out that was Brett Sabinski, and he just fell over in deep snow. The next person out leapfrogged his position. Turns out through after action, we know that was John Chapman, and he ends up on point charging after the what is known as bunker number 1.
Right. And what happens when he gets there? Could you see what he did?
Yeah, so the team fans out. The way I'll explain all of this is a blend between what we knew in real time and what I know, after the analysis and looking at the videos. So in the real time aspect, you see the team fan out and immediately gunfire erupts. My pilot describes it as a firefight in a phone booth. It goes on for about 10 minutes or so, and we're just waiting with bated breath for anybody to come up on comms. We're trying to get a hold of them. I don't know if they're trying to get a hold of us. We haven't been able to establish two-way comms, and eventually you see the team kind of come back together. They pop smoke and they break contact.
And break contact, just for the non-military folks in the audience, means they move off their position, right?
Yeah, they're trying to break contact from the enemy. The enemy is in an elevated, dug-in, entrenched position. There's a heavy machine gun up there. There's multiple bunkers. The team is not pinned down, but they're outgunned at this point. So they're trying to break contact, essentially to reestablish. It's like a tactical retreat. They they're not running away from the fight, but they're kind of trying to do a reset and come at it from a different way.
When they move off that ridge, off that summit, they're not able to see what's happening on that summit, right?
Yeah, no, they once they've broken contact from the top of the mountain there, they can't see what's going on directly on top of the mountain where they were originally engaged with the enemy.
Right.
This is the point where they finally are able to establish two-way radio comms with us. Again, this entire time we've been trying to call them, our sister ship's trying to call them, but for the first time we hear them come up on the radio and we can actually respond to them, and everybody hears and receives one another. So it becomes kind of a hasty call for fire. It's Mako 30 calling Grim. They're telling us that they're no longer on top of the mountain. They've got a possible KIA and that they need fire on top now.
Okay, so just to circle back, the Slavinsky and the rest of Mako 30 that have moved off their position, that have broken contact, they're not able to see what's going on the summit, but you are, right?
Yeah. So we're in orbit overhead, so we've got a bird's eye view of what's going on. We're trying to keep tabs on the mountaintop and the friendly position.
And then what did you see next?
So as Mako 30 calls for the fires on top now, the aircraft immediately starts to go hot with weapons release. I mentioned Murphy before. Of course, as soon as that happened, the gun that we were looking to engage with had a malfunction, so the crew has to quickly switch over to the other guns. It's loaded with a different type of artillery round, and we need to go point detonating instead of proximity based on the fact that we've got a potential injured teammate that's down there on the top. So you don't want to go shooting a prox round that's going to explode above ground level, and then potentially, shrapnel out into a larger frag pattern. So they push down the point detonating 105s. They're the first rounds off the aircraft, and then eventually gun 5, the 40 millimeter Bofors cannon comes back online, and we're able to switch back to the smaller artillery rounds and continue firing on what we suspect are those known enemy positions.
So you're opening fire, and as you're raining fire down on that position, but at some point you see a strobe, your sensors pick up a strobe starting to move.
Yeah. So in the midst of that initial call for fire and us splitting rounds down, there's enemy on adjacent mountainsides that start to fire mortars in on the original landing zone. At that time, the team's talking about mortar fire and asking whether or not that round was ours. And so the sensors start looking around very carefully, trying to make sure, like, hey, where's he talking about, and in relation to where our fires were actually impacting. And as they're going through that, our TV sensor operator, Chris, he sees a separate strobe, and it starts an internal dialogue on the aircraft. And he's like, well, here's the friendlies, and the infrared's talking about where he's shooting, and the TV says, I got a second strobe up here, but this one doesn't look like the others.
So you're firing pretty close to this position where the strobe just appeared, right?
Yeah, it's so at this point, it causes pause. There's a cause for concern because we're trying to figure out what in the world. Now we've got a friendly strobe going off. We know it's not Petty Officer Roberts because we see his body. We knew where he had been propped up by the enemy. It was like he was sitting there as bait to draw us in. So as the team had broken contact, we're shooting all those known positions that are slightly above grade from where bunker number 1 is. So we're shooting at that higher ground. Well, that's the point in which Chris sees the second strobe, and it's near bunker 1. When you go back and it's hard to see in real time. And I would tell you, had we had the fidelity in real time, how everything's unfolded might have gone a little bit differently. However, since we didn't know it in real time, we continued to shoot, what we know to be the known enemy positions. But when you go back and you look at that gunship footage, the point in which Chris is talking about that second strobe, you can see Chapman getting into that bunker.
So do you think that the rounds you were firing kind of brought Chapman around, that he was maybe knocked unconscious or something?
Yeah. So, this is the benefit of hindsight, right? But if the team breaks contact and their possible KIA is John Chapman and not Petty Officer Roberts, the only thing I could think of is that they thought he was killed in the initial assault, and they broke contact based on the extreme, the extreme situation, the hostile fire that they were under. So they break contact and they move down the mountain and put terrain between them. Well, if Chapman wasn't killed during that initial assault and he's just unconscious, our 105s are a pretty good alarm clock. I would imagine that is what jostles him awake. And then, like any controller, I mean, he knows what's going on. He knows where he's at. He's got a gunship overhead, and a 105 goes off. Then, I mean, if I were him, I would imagine he would have turned on his strobe to mark his position and gone to the safest place, which happened to be a bunker at that point.
There are still some in the SEAL community who continue to believe that Chapman was not left alive on that mountain. Is there any doubt in your mind about what you saw?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
What SEAL Team 6 was upset about in particular was the implication that Britt Slavinsky had left someone behind on that mountaintop. That may be what happened, but there's no indication that he did that knowingly, right? He didn't know that John Chapman was still alive.
Yeah, I mean, so there is no implication that they left somebody behind. I mean, they flat out did, but it absolutely was unintentional. So, I can only imagine under the circumstances and knowing how fast all of this stuff unfolded, we're sitting there on pins and needles wanting to help out a team, and you see them, and again, that firefight in a phone booth, and it comes so bad that one of your best assault forces has to pop smoke and break contact. When they tactically withdrew from that situation, they did so for a reason. I can't imagine any American that serves in the military understanding that everyone knows, leave no one behind. So there was never any intent for them to do such. However, that's what happened. And it's only because they thought that Chapman was dead, and it turns out that he wasn't. He literally gets jolted alive, I think, by those 105s going off. And then you see the strobe come on and him get into the bunker. It's plain as day. Like, absolutely irrefutable, cannot be disputed.
Did you ever hear Chapman's voice over the radio again?
I didn't. So when I told you at the beginning of the mission, those initial calls when Chapman was on the radio, it was always 30 Charlie. Charlie was the suffix for that combat controller, the controller. What part of the research showed, there was a controller on an adjacent mountaintop who heard Chapman come back up on the radio after our gunship had left. And so as a buddy of mine by the name of Jay Hill, he's captured in a few different places other than his eyewitness testimony with that story being out there. I've spoken to him. I heard him explain it, through his own words. He was present with me when we did the initial presentation to the team for the very first time. And I think it was September of 2016 when we met him.
Okay. So when did you leave the scene? How long did you stay there?
So when you go back and you look at everything, I think that, I think the research showed that Chapman was up there by himself for about an hour. When I go back and I look at the audio that I had transcribed from all of that, again, I can't tell you with certainty on my timestamps, because that would have been a portion of footage that was it was edited in the sense of anything before the event was cut off, and anything after the end, like when we get ready to depart, was cut off. So that way we had, as small of a overall recording. Nothing was removed from the internal portion of those, the bookended time start and stop. But anyway, for what it's worth, the audio that I had transcribed from the moment that we get up there and the team blows through our initial spot and they infill back to the original insertion point, it's more than an hour until we're literally ordered to return home. Probably about an hour and 15 minutes or so from the point of insertion. Somewhere hour and 15, hour and 20 by the time we start to fly off and return to base.
Before you left, did you see Chapman's strobe in that bunker? Did it move, or did anything else happen?
As we were departing, I would tell you at that point, I don't know. But when we recovered back to our base in Uzbekistan, we had a really quick debrief up underneath the left wing. And the TAC crew had gathered, and Chris was adamant. He said, "Guys, we left somebody up there."
Okay, and that's a good segue into the next section of our story here, which is the years go by, and at some point, the Air Force starts to look to upgrade John Chapman's Air Force Cross to a Medal of Honor. Do you know how that came about? What started all that?
Yeah, there were some news articles around that time. I want to say that the conversations first started somewhere around 2009, if I recall. There haven't been that many like significant Valor awards, specifically the Medal of Honor, and ultimately that resulted in the SecDef asking the services to go back and look at their top Valor awards for consideration. So exactly when that started, I can't tell you. For me, it was around 2014 when I learned that Chapman was specifically being looked at. I had an old mentor of mine named Frank Daly. He's one of my chiefs. Frank had reached out to me because he knew that I was part of the Grim 3-2 crew that was overhead that night. And so I still had a lot of the original crew documentation as far as knowing how to get a hold of people and so forth.
So the specific information that you provided for Chapman's Medal of Honor package is the stuff that we've been talking about, right? It's your sensor readings and what the whole story we just laid out.
Yeah. So what's interesting here is there's never any dispute on what happened immediately after the helicopter inserted Mako 30 to try and recover Petty Officer Roberts. Everybody understands that Chapman ended up on point. He charges and takes out the first bunker. He's credited with saving the team. The team themselves did amazing, heroic things. Several of them took casualties. They were wounded by enemy fire, and ultimately, John is wounded to the point where they think that he's dead. They pop smoke and they break contact. If you stop it right there, you already have the makings of John's original Air Force Cross. And so, like that story's never disputed. The dispute comes in when the Air Force research shows that John survived initial contact and he continued to fight up there alone on top of the mountain.
We know now that there was a predator circling over Takur Ghar. When did you become aware that there was a second set of eyes on that scene?
So I had always known that, I say always known, there was a book published, would have been before 2006. It was Malcolm McPherson's account of Roberts Ridge. And that's when I had seen, the additional theories and so forth as far as the potential that it was Roberts, it was Chapman, it was red on red. And that was part of what was captured in that Predator video, the additional video. So I had known that it existed. I had just never seen it. And it wasn't until this particular research effort did that actually come out and become part of the overall evidence.
There's a part of Chapman's Medal of Honor package I wanted to ask you about. It's called Material Finding Number 2, and it's never been made public, I believe. What can you tell us? What's in Material Finding Number 2, and what can you tell us about it?
So I'm not certain that Material Finding 2 had never been made public. I think that that was the part that people considered sensitive, and I would say sensitive for a number of reasons. One, it was sensitive to the Navy. The Navy didn't like it because material finding 2 was everything that happened after contact was broken. So that was the point in which we know that Chapman survived, and Chapman ended up being the only American on top, fighting for his life, fighting off enemy fighters up there, and ultimately sacrificing his life for the quick reaction force helicopter to come in. And so everything that would have been considered material finding 2 was the point in which the team thought that Chapman had died, and to the point where Chapman actually died. And that was when he had come out from cover and he started engaging known enemy positions, because he had heard that helo make a high-speed run like they typically would have, and they come back in for that assault. That's the point where he breaks out of cover, and you can see him on the footage, and he engages those known enemy fighter positions, and then ultimately he's killed at that point.
Rob, when did you learn that the SEALs were not happy with the Air Force's effort to honor Chapman with the Medal of Honor?
So that was brought to my attention shortly before we met with them in 2016. It was obvious at that point that we were meeting some resistance. You knew that it was sensitive because it's a joint arena. It's a joint community that we're trying to navigate. You've got Navy that is the primary assault force. You've got Air Force Combat Controller that's embedded with this particular SEAL team, and the Air Force is trying their damnedest to take the high road and not try and thumb the Navy in the eye, because you know that immediately the conversation is going to go to, you left somebody behind. So we've touched on this. Yes, that happened. I don't believe there was any intent for that to happen by any means. But the moment that something like that comes out, now you're about to tarnish the reputation of a significant element.
Rob, did you ever have a face-to-face meeting with the SEALs during this process?
Yeah, the first time we met with them was the first time I met with them was in September of 2016. That it was the time in which the Air Force was presenting the totality of the evidence for that initial view. It was a courtesy that we were given before it went to any board or anything like that. We wanted to make sure that the team had a chance to see it, so that there were no surprises. And ultimately, the reason why there was a sensitivity there is because this is the first time where we're actually going to break to them that Chapman survived initial contact, and here's the video and all the other evidence.
Okay, so this is a pretty important meeting. Who was involved in that meeting, and what can you set it up a little bit? Where did it take place, and who was there?
And so members of the research team and the leadership involved in it. We were our colonel at this point was Mike Martin. He was in charge of he was the commander of the special operations wing that essentially owned the research team or key members of the research team, at least that effort. Mike Martin was there. The project officer was there. The medical officer was there that had done the forensic medical examination. Myself, Jay Hill, I think that rounded out and Tim, one of the imagery analysts that was specifically involved. So all the major elements of the research project were represented by the Air Force and there and present.
Right. So there's a lot of imagery analysis, but there's also a medical component to this. Can you talk through the medical evidence that was presented or that you guys gathered?
Yeah, so I will describe this to the best of my ability, but the original medical examination, as I understood it, essentially categorizes the wounds from most lethal to least lethal, and it doesn't necessarily put an order of when those wounds are received, other than you think that whatever wound is what caused the subject to die, that's effectively the last one. One of the reasons for that is that, like in this case, John's, it was determined that John was killed when the aorta was severed, by that final round. When that happens, there's an immediate blood pressure loss. And so there's no other bruising or bleeding that happens from those other wounds if he had continued to fight after that particular point. At least that's minimized as a result. I'll save the medical explanation for a doctor, but that was the way that was explained. And so when that medical officer did the re-examination, they were able to look at it like a criminal, forensic medical examination would have done. And rather than rack and stack them from most to least, they try to put a time order based on bruising and that sort of thing. And the good thing is he had access to the original medical examiner. So he wasn't doing it in a vacuum by himself based on his own belief or own understanding of medicine. He was literally going back through it based on his criminal forensic training with the benefit of having access to the original medical examiner and doing it in concert.
He's wounded early on after he inserts, but that wasn't the wound that killed him, right?
So I don't want to speak out of turn on this one because this part of the research is not my specific area of expertise. But to summarize it for the layman out there, the medical criminal forensic examination, what it ends up showing is there's a significant wound that Chapman suffers, and that, from a time chronology standpoint, is attributed to the original assault of the bunker when the team thinks that Chapman is now dead and they break contact. Then there's additional wounds that cannot, if Chapman is killed right there and he's taken out, then the additional wounds that are discovered on his body, like it's not explainable at that point. I told you that the new medical doctor that had done the examination had access to the original medical doctor, and he asked him, he's like, what did you think when you were examining this body? He's like, this dude had been in the the wildest fight for his life that I've ever seen of anybody.
Right. So it's another piece of evidence in the picture here. There's also something called pixel tracking, and this becomes controversial at least for the SEALs later on. Can you explain what is pixel tracking? What did it show, and what was it about?
The basics of pixel tracking had to do with matching up the imagery with the original after action debriefs. So you knew the order in which the assault team exited the helicopter, and at that point, the imagery analysts could then turn around and assess the heat signature of each individual, and then assign that to maintain an imagery-based chain of custody whenever the infrared sensor operator had panned off to look at a different area and then come back. Now they can match up. This heat signature went to team member number 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it happened to be. So there was controversy over it because some people say, hey, that's not real, it doesn't work, what have you. But the reality is there is no controversy because it's just a small sliver of the totality of the package. So if you look at everything, whether it be their own eyewitness accounts, the team members' debriefs, then what the rest of the imagery shows, it doesn't matter, because in the end, it's either Petty Officer Roberts, the rest of Mako 3-0, or it's John Chapman. We know that Roberts was dead. We know that the team had broken contact. The only other person is John Chapman up there on top of the mountain.
Got it. And this is, this is kind of unprecedented for a Medal of Honor package, right? You're breaking new ground here in military history.
It was, I think I've read somewhere something in regards with, like the amount of digital evidence and so forth. So, yeah, obviously that played a significant role in all of this. I'm sure that other significant events have been recorded. I mean, whether it's full motion video or what have you, a lot of that stuff had been captured since these times. But anyway, it obviously played a significant role in Chapman's medal upgrade.
Okay, so let's come back to that meeting you were telling us about. So who was there from the SEAL side?
So they had Captain Jeremy Williams, who was commander of DevGru at the time. And then it was Slab, 2 other members of the team, and then one member that was remote in. And I think that they had their intel director there as well. If I remember correctly, it's Commander Hartwell.
Rob, I think that you mentioned Jeremy Williams. He's now a admiral, right?
Yeah, as far as I know, he's a 2-star. He's still out there, and rumor has it that he's on shortlist for a new post, new command.
Some of the literature that's been written about this, Alone at Dawn, and more significantly, Matt Cole's book Code Over Country, I think, fleshes out his role in this whole operation. I think he was, like Tim Szymanski, he was also there in the operations center when this all went down.
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, when you talk to those who were actually there in Bagram at the talk and so forth, Szymanski was there. Jeremy Williams was there at that point in his career, and I think Matt Cole actually talks about that in his book. When you look at the characters that Matt Cole talks about that were significant in Dev Group, and some of the things, the stories that Cole tells in Code Over Country, you had Szymanski, then you had Howard, and then you had Jay Williams. So yeah, I think that Szymanski and Howard have all retired, but you still got one character out there, and Jay Williams, who's still out there, still ongoing with a successful career and so on. And if you go back and connect the dots, look back at Commander Hartwell saying that he was tasked, and well, everything that Hartwell said was nothing more than counter argument to what the Air Force's research was. And why in the hell another service would sit there and try and produce a counter narrative to someone else's research, I have no idea. But if Hartwell was tasked, he was tasked by then Captain Jay Williams. So when you look at those characters that Cole talks about, Szymanski, Howard, now Jay Williams, there's still one left.
Okay. And this is the first time they're seeing the video footage that you guys had, is that right?
So this is the first presentation that shows the totality of the research, and yeah, we're stepping through everything, and it's kind of the package itself is kind of building on the overall timelines, and then we basically tell it from beginning to end, and then build the additional layers of evidence between the medical, the eyewitness, and then I think we ended with Jay's account of hearing Chappie after the gunships had left. Tried to tell everything in effectively a chronological order, just as the story would have unfolded.
Right. And what was the reaction from the SEALs when you finished?
Had I personally known them all, I would have been able to read the room a little bit better. But I would tell you that the common theme was, that's not how we recall it. We were there, and nobody can argue with us because we were on top of the mountain.
Wow. Did you push back on that?
I did, because especially when it came to the gunship footage, they tried to use the "we don't remember it that way" and we were there, and it was one of those with all due respect moments. I clarified with the team. It was like, actually, the gunship had the ultimate high ground. We had picture on what was going on, and at this point, y'all had broken contact, and you had terrain between you and the enemy.
Was it a tense meeting?
No, I mean, I would describe it as extremely cordial. Again, the Air Force, you're in a joint environment. You know that, the big dog on this block is that, it was a combat controller embedded with a SEAL team. The SEALs were in the lead on this particular assault. Maybe not in the entire mission, but this particular assault, it was theirs. It was their call. So, as far as, any hostility in the meeting or anything like that, no, none whatsoever. It was cordial. It was professional. But again, from an Air Force perspective, we're over there trying not to poke a teammate in the chest and say, you left them behind, because nobody wants to come across looking like they're trying to point blame or anything like that. Again, I would tell you, while it's evident that Chapman was left, I believe that they did not think that he was alive. Otherwise, they wouldn't have left him.
but the meeting may not have been tense, but they did not like what you had to tell them, and they worked pretty hard to undermine it, right?
It was made absolutely clear that they would stipulate to everything short of when you asked about material finding two. As long as the Air Force's research stopped at essentially what would have been the basis of Chapman's Air Force Cross, they were fine with it. But anything beyond that, the answer was nope. We don't remember it that way. This is where you run into the different accounts of I checked to see if John was alive, and then you get the different descriptions on how that was done. I checked to see for rise and fall of his chest and so forth, to the point of I think in one account I crawled right over him. Well, you couldn't use that explanation, because at this point now we had all the footage that shows that Slab didn't crawl over John. He didn't even get close enough to reach out and touch him.
So it's been reported, and it's kind of generally understood, that the SEALs were upset because Chapman's Medal of Honor would show that they left someone behind. Is that why they were throwing up roadblocks, do you think?
I think that plays a part in it. Ultimately, I attribute it to this. Like, I've spent 30 years in the intelligence community. If I'm reading the totality of this situation, the fact that they say they'll stipulate to only what the original findings of the Air Force Cross were and nothing more, and the fact that Captain Williams looks at Slab at the end of that meeting and says, maybe we should look at upgrading yours. I would tell you that it's twofold. One, it's we don't want to be remembered for leaving somebody. Okay. And I get that. Nobody would. But I tell you, in my professional opinion, the reason why that is because they know that they have no new information on Slab. So if you're taking Navy Cross of Slabinski and Air Force Cross of John Chapman, if you go based on their original findings and you try to upgrade them, then you have two potential Medal of Honor recipients. If the Air Force walks in and we only know this about Slab, and the Air Force comes in and says, we know this about Chapman and we know this, then which one of those is worthy of upgrade to Medal of Honor? Do they both trigger the award criteria, or is one of those greater and one gets upgraded and the other one doesn't? I don't know. It's a kind of a hypothetical set of circumstances, but I would tell you that within the shadow of a doubt, I believe that it's twofold why they slow rolled and essentially subverted Chapman's Medal of Honor research. It was because if new information came out, they had no chance of getting Chapman or getting Slabinski upgraded to a Medal of Honor themselves, or it's because they don't want to be known as leaving somebody behind. I tell you, it's both.
Wow. And just a little bit of context, in Medals of Honor, if there's new information, that carries additional weight, right? That carries special weight.
I don't know that it carries special weight, but anytime you're going through a review process for any kind of an upgrade or what have you, what you have is, okay, if it's upgrade based on the original findings, then it's, hey, let's go back and look at it and see, did it meet the criteria for this level of award based on the original information? In this case, you had not only that, but you had all the additional that would have been stipulated as what we call material finding 2. And that was the fact that you had incontrovertible evidence that shows that Chapman survived initial contact, and that there's only one plausible scenario with all of that information that comes to bear. Fifi's dead. The team has broke contact. Chapman is the lone American on top. And so, again, I've told you that the other prevailing theory was that it was red on red. I think fighting each other up there.
I mean, that was part of the pushback, was that there was I think they even produced a video that purported to show that Chapman had died, and that the strobes you were seeing were Afghan. Afghans. Do I have that right?
So I never saw that one. I've heard that that there was essentially, like the SEALs built their own video or something to that effect. I don't know. I was never shown that.
Rob, who was the driving force behind the SEALs' effort to block Chapman's medal?
I think that's a valid question. What I can tell you is that I've got emails that say that, from Commander Hartwell saying that he was tasked to research the Air Force's research on John Chapman. So if you look at the time and place of all of that, then that tells me that it was Captain Jeremy Williams that ordered Commander Hartwell to do the research. And so if you're trying to say that there was, if you're asking whether or not there was one person ordering all of that, you can go back and look at who was where at that point in time of their career. And the commander of Naval Special Warfare was Admiral Zemansky, and the commander of Dev Group was Captain Jeremy Williams.
From my first podcast with Eric Deming, he pointed to Tim Szymanski, the admiral in charge of Naval Special Warfare at the time, because Szymanski had a role in this operation. I think he was operations officer. And if people want to learn more about it, they can go and check out our first podcast with Eric. Commander Hartwell, who you mentioned, he was part of DevGru. He was an intel officer there, right?
Yeah. So the only reason why I know a decent bit about him is because of some emails that came to my possession. But he, so I read in his emails where apparently he was prior enlisted in the Navy, ended up commissioning. He became a pilot. There was a medical issue that took him out of the cockpit, and then he became an intel officer after that. So at this point in his career, he's an intel officer working at Dev Group.
He had dedicated himself to kind of scrutinizing the evidence you presented and coming up with a counter narrative or pushing back, right?
Yeah, at least in the times where I was part of some of the review boards and so forth, the Air Force would come in and lay out the case, whether that was being walked beginning to end by the project officer, and then along with the various eyewitness accounts or the medical examiner, or the imagery analyst, or what have you. We would talk through our various pieces of the research package. But anytime we ran into resistance from the Navy, it was coming from the voice of Commander Hartwell.
Rob, did you participate in another meeting with the SEALs?
Yeah, there was so whenever you're going through this, there's several different levels of review boards. So the initial one that I had taken part in was a demonstration to the team in September of 16. And then it was about a year later, around October of 17, that we did the SOCOM Valor board. I was unable to be present there, but I remoted in and presented my portion of the case.
Got it. And so this time it's your Air Force team, the SEALs, and now there's the SOCOM leadership is there as well, right?
Yeah, it was literally the SOCOM deputy commander.
Wow. Okay. And what happened in that meeting?
In that meeting, the Air Force presents their case, where I'm listening in. I think the majority of that speaking was done by Colonel Martin and the project officer at that point, and then they called on me to say my portion of it from remotely, and so I explained my portion of the case, and it was essentially that absolutely without a shadow of a doubt, we saw the second strobe on the gunship, and you knew at that point that Chapman had survived initial contact.
And this time the SEALs pushed back, right?
Yeah, they at this point, their, I'm going to call it, for lack of better terms, their counter narrative to the Chapman research was, it had grown. They had essentially gotten their story more complete as they wanted to tell it. There was a point where Commander Hartwell he spoke up and he started talking about various intelligence sources, and it happened to be related to exactly what I did and in my career. And so he was making reference to stuff that that I knew didn't happen because it's exactly what I was doing that night. And so I called him on it and asked him if he had the evidence to back up that claim, and he didn't. And so I clarified for the board that I was directly overhead and I was the person who is specific to that area of expertise. And absolutely, I refute what he said.
That must have stung a little bit because the deputy commander of SOCOM's in the room and you're calling him out.
Well, I mean, I did, but so when I tell you that the Air Force had to continually, play nice with others in this case, where the operators, the combat controllers that we're talking about in this case, they exist in one organization. The SEALs exist in their organization. Army has their own organization, but all these things come together in this joint environment. And so our Air Force, our special tactics guys have to embed with these folks. And so, everything about it in their operations is all about the relationships. So if someone's going to be able to speak out in this case, it's going to be one of the specific, witnesses that can push back when someone is making an allegation that to be untrue.
So the Air Force Special Operations guys, they have to work with the SEALs, but you didn't. You were at a different phase in your career. So did that kind of free you up a little bit to be a little more assertive, do you think?
No, I mean, absolutely. But so as you go through this, if someone wants to push back and that you have the irrefutable evidence, then I'm going to push back. It's not the first time that I work with SEALs. It's not the first time that I've been in a room with general officers or had to push back against something that I knew not to be true. That's part of why I promoted in the Air Force. You have the ability to speak truth to power, and then it didn't hurt that that other members that were sitting around that board knew exactly who I was because I had trained with them. I remember calling out one of the chiefs at the table by name because I had just been in the same classrooms with him not 2 or 3 years before. So they knew the airmen that were in that room that knew who I was on the other end of that video teleconference knew what I was talking about, and they wholeheartedly believed me, as they should have.
So SOCOM board pushes it up to the next level, which I think is the Secretary of Defense at this point, who was Mattis at the time. Is that right?
And that was, I think, the timing of all of this stuff. We're talking the tail end of 17, early 18, as everything is coming to the final stage of the process. So to the best of my recollection, it's Secretary Mattis that was in the seat as the Secretary of Defense.
And how did Mattis, did you ever get to present to him? Did you hear how he took the findings?
No, so I didn't, not personally, but as it was relayed to me, it's actually kind of funny. That when it finally gets to that stage, it's on the SecDef's desk before it can get pushed to the final approval for the president and so forth. What was relayed to me was that General Goldfein's the Chief of Staff of the Air Force at the time, and he tasked a colonel that he had specifically hired. He happened to be a former 24 SAL commander that actually was in charge of the wing when the research began. And so, come full circle, now this colonel is now moved into the Chief of Staff of the Air Force's office as the senior general in the Air Force's Chief of Staff. And so General Goldfein knows that he knows the story inside and out. And he says, "Hey, I need you to go over there and explain. This story better than anybody. I'm not sending anybody else. You go over and meet with SecDef Mattis and answer whatever he's got."
And what happened?
So whenever you're going through something like this, there's always, well, okay, I've heard your theory. What's the view of others? And so the the officer that was there explaining it, it's now he's a 2-star. It's Wolf Davidson. My understanding is that he relays that one theory was that it was Roberts, which we know was dead, and it couldn't have been true. The other one was that it was Chapman, but the prevailing view of other was that it was red on red, meaning that the enemy was shooting each other. And from what was relayed to me, the SecDef's response was kind of incredulous. It was, so let me get this straight. A group of foreign fighters that have been on top of a mountain for an extended period of time, talking weeks, months together, in broad daylight, in close quarters, are up there shooting each other face to face. He's like, I don't buy it. And so from there, it was approved.
That's a great story. So, Chapman's medal is, we know the story now, it was approved. He did get the Medal of Honor, but this has never happened before, where one military branch is trying to derail another's effort to obtain a Medal of Honor. Did this change how you look at the SEALs?
I just tell you that it blew my mind. I don't understand why that would be the case. And I think if you had a room full of special operators, regardless of branch, regardless of which position you had, I think the majority of folks would see this one way, and that's the right way. Recognize the evidence as it is, know what's true is true, respect it, and honor it. We wouldn't be in this situation right now at the National Medal of Honor Museum if that hadn't been the path that the Navy decided to take. You wouldn't be sitting in a situation where the Air Force is upset. Well, I'm not going to say that the Air Force is upset. You wouldn't be sitting in a situation where you have a family member of John Chapman upset based on what she was originally told by members of the museum. And then now this current situation, as we understand it, to where, Flab will be recognized during the opening, and Chapman won't be in that significant manner.
Okay. So I think I'm going to wrap up, but before I do, is there anything else you want to hit before we go?
Yeah, it just, like I said, when I say it blows my mind, for the life of me, why wouldn't the museum put both members in an equal display, knowing that they earned the medal in the same battle space, the same event? If it doesn't make sense, unless you're worried about there being a stigma about leaving somebody or what have you, unless it starts to tarnish an image or what have you. I can't explain it. It doesn't make sense to me, but I can tell you it's wrong. It shouldn't be done that way. And when you look at some of the other things that have been published out there and so forth, this just kind of runs true to some of the other bad press that you might see out there.
Rob, thanks so much for talking to us. You've been really generous with your time, but I think it's an important story that people need to hear, and they need to hear it from the people who witnessed it. And that's a service that I can provide, and I'm so glad you helped me do that.
I appreciate it, Seth. Thanks to both you and Eric. Like I said, you had asked before how we had come in contact. Well, I saw that first podcast with Eric Deming, and I respect the hell out of it. The story that he relays in there, and some of his frustration within his own community, it holds true with what I experienced, and it was just one of those where I applaud any of us that have the intestinal fortitude to speak truth to power and to do our damnedest to hold people accountable. And in this case, there are people that still haven't been held accountable, and they continue to get away with it.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to have to leave it there, but thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks.